Thousands of people walked into a facility in Manchuria between 1936 and 1945. Not one of them walked out. The men responsible never spent a single day in prison, and for decades, the world did not even know their names. This wasn't a rogue operation run by a few mad scientists in the dark. This was government-sanctioned, militarily funded, and staffed by thousands of doctors, researchers, and soldiers. This operation ran for nearly a decade, and when it was finally over, when the war ended, and the world began demanding accountability, the truth was not revealed. It was traded, exchanged for data, buried under classified documents and political convenience. The Holocaust has been written about in thousands of books. The Nuremberg trials are taught in schools across the world. But Unit 731, a program that killed thousands inside its walls and tens of thousands beyond them, remained hidden from mainstream history for decades. Not because the evidence didn't exist, but because the people who had the evidence decided silence was more valuable than justice. The secret facility. In 1925, the world's great military powers sat down and agreed on something. Biological and chemical weapons, the kind that had already killed nearly 1 million soldiers in World War I, were too horrific to ever use again. They signed a convention banning them. Countries across the world put their names to it. Japan was one of them. But one Japanese military doctor read that agreement very differently from everyone else. His name was Shiro Ishii, and his reasoning was simple. If the world's most powerful nations had decided something was dangerous enough to ban, it must be worth having. Ishii was a microbiologist, a military colonel, and by most accounts a man who had convinced himself he was a visionary. He was brilliant, he was arrogant, and he had absolutely no moral limits. He began lobbying the Imperial Japanese Army through the 1920s and into the early 1930s. His pitch wasn't about ideology or science, it was about money. He argued biological weapons were far cheaper than building and maintaining massive conventional forces. Bacteria, he said, cost almost nothing, and they could devastate an enemy. The army said yes. By 1932, Japan had established its first biological weapons program. 4 years later, in 1936, Ishii was placed in charge of a far larger operation, a brand new facility built in the Pingfan district, just outside Harbin, the largest city in Manchuria. Its official name was the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. That name was chosen deliberately. Boring, bureaucratic, unthreatening. It wasn't called Unit 731 until 1941. The facility itself was enormous. 150 buildings spread across 6 square kilometers, its own railway line, its own airfield, laboratories, operating rooms, military barracks, and notably, several cremation facilities. It employed several thousand staff at its peak: doctors, scientists, soldiers, administrators. And then there were the others, the ones who arrived not as staff, but as subjects. Inside the horror. The researchers at Unit 731 needed test subjects, living human beings on whom they could conduct their experiments. They drew from political prisoners, criminals, the poor, the homeless, Chinese civilians caught in the wrong place, Soviet prisoners of war, women, children. Some accounts suggest captured British and American soldiers were also used, though this remains partially documented. The researchers had a name for all of them: Maruta, logs. The comparison was deliberate. Logs are raw material. Logs are cut down. Logs don't have names. The facility was divided into 8 divisions. Division 1 handled bacteriological research, studying bubonic plague, typhoid, anthrax, cholera. Division 2 focused on how to actually use biological agents in the field, how to deploy disease as a weapon on a battlefield. The remaining 6 divisions handled administration, clinical diagnosis, and the production and storage of biological agents. What happened inside the experimental wards is among the most disturbing documented history of the 20th century. Surgeries were performed on living prisoners without anesthesia. The reasoning, written into their own research notes, was that an unanesthetized subject produced cleaner results. Organs were removed while the person was still alive. Limbs were amputated, and in some cases, reattached to different parts of the body to observe how the human body responded. Prisoners were taken outside in Manchurian winter, and their limbs were exposed until they froze solid. Researchers then tested different methods of thawing: boiling water, open flame, to document the damage. Some were subjected to extreme changes in atmospheric pressure, placed in sealed chambers until their bodies could no longer bear it. Others were starved, dehydrated. Each experiment had a hypothesis. Each experiment had someone recording the result, and then there were the disease experiments. Prisoners were deliberately infected with plague, cholera, and typhoid. They were given no treatment. Researchers simply observed how long it took them to show symptoms and how long it took them to die. But Unit 731 didn't stop at the walls of the facility. They took their experiments outside. Researchers dropped plague-infested fleas over nearby Chinese cities and villages from aircraft. They poisoned water wells with cholera and typhoid. These were not accidents. They were field tests, designed to measure how effectively a disease could spread through a population. In 1942, a field test went wrong. More than 1,000 Japanese soldiers were accidentally infected with cholera. After that, Unit 731 shifted focus toward weaponizing disease for delivery by bomb-developing artillery shells and devices that could disperse plague-infected fleas on detonation. They were even developing plans to use these weapons against the United States, attaching plague bombs to balloons set to drift across the Pacific, or dropping them by aircraft on American cities. The direct death toll from experiments inside the facility is estimated at somewhere between 3,000 and 12,000. The deaths from field tests on Chinese civilian populations, the poisoned wells, the plague drops, the contaminated food, are estimated in the tens of thousands. Some historians put that number far higher. When Soviet forces advanced toward Manchuria in August 1945, Ishii ordered the facility destroyed. Buildings were blown up. Records were burned. The remaining prisoners were executed. Ishii gathered his staff before they dispersed and told them, "Take this secret to your graves." For a while, with a great deal of help, they almost succeeded. The deal with the devil. The war ended. Japan surrendered. The world turned its attention to accountability. In Nuremberg, Nazi doctors who had conducted human experiments on concentration camp prisoners were put on trial. The proceedings were thorough, public, and resulted in executions. The world agreed. No uniform, no order, no ideology excused what had been done to human beings in the name of science. On the other side of the world, General Douglas MacArthur was overseeing the American occupation of Japan. MacArthur assigned a lieutenant colonel named Murray Sanders to investigate Japan's biological warfare activities. Sanders began gathering information. What he found was extensive, and it quickly became clear to the American military that Unit 731 had produced years' worth of biological weapons data that no ethical scientist could ever replicate, data that would take decades to generate through any legitimate means. The Cold War was beginning. The Soviet Union was the new threat, and the Soviets, who had captured some Unit 731 staff, were likely pursuing the same information. So MacArthur made a decision. At Sanders' suggestion, he offered full political immunity to Ishii and the other high-ranking officers of Unit 731 in exchange for their research data. The deal was made in September 1945. The U.S. government, according to 2 declassified documents, also paid Unit 731 members directly for the data. The total amount paid was between 150,000 and 200,000 yen, equivalent in today's terms, to somewhere between 20 and 40 million yen. The evidence was classified. Access to key witnesses was blocked. American prisoners of war who had been in Japanese custody were explicitly told not to discuss their experiences with the media or with anyone not cleared by the military. And at the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal, Japan's equivalent of Nuremberg, the crimes of Unit 731 were never brought before the court. In 1981, one of the last surviving judges of the Tokyo Tribunal, a Dutch judge named Bert Rolling, finally spoke about what he had learned decades after the fact. He said, "It was a bitter experience to discover that the most disgusting, centrally ordered Japanese war crimes had been deliberately kept secret from the court by the United States government." Shiro Ishii was never charged. He lived out the rest of his life in Japan and died of throat cancer in 1959. His colleagues, the doctors and scientists who had run Unit 731's divisions, returned to Japan and rebuilt their lives. Some became prominent figures in Japanese medicine. Some entered academia. Some rose to senior positions in government and industry. The men who had called human beings logs went on to become respected citizens. A truth buried. For decades, Japan officially said almost nothing. Unit 731 did not appear in school textbooks. It was absent from state histories. When researchers or journalists attempted to investigate, they found silence from the government and denial from the men who had been there. Even the question of who authorized it was long avoided. Emperor Hirohito had given his consent to the activities of Unit 731. His younger brother, Prince Mikasa, had personally toured the facility and later recorded in his memoirs that he had watched films showing Chinese prisoners being marched into the open plains of Manchuria for poison gas experiments. The imperial family knew, the military knew, the government knew, and for decades the official posture was to say as little as possible and hope the world moved on. It wasn't until the 1980s that Japan formally acknowledged that biological warfare experiments had been conducted at all. In 2002, a Japanese district court ruled for the first time that Japan had engaged in biological warfare, though it declined to award compensation to victims. In 2018, the National Archives of Japan released the names of 3,607 people who had been members of Unit 731, names of the perpetrators. Decades after the fact, with almost no consequence attached, China built a museum at the Pingfound site. It stands today on what remains of the original compound, the foundations, the cells, the ruins of the buildings Ishii ordered blown up in 1945. Hundreds of thousands of visitors walk through it every year. But for the families of those who died there, the Chinese civilians who were called logs, who were infected and frozen and cut open and killed, a museum is not justice. An archive release is not justice. A court ruling without compensation is not justice. Compare this to Nuremberg. The principle established there was clear. Following orders is not a defense. Being a doctor, a scientist, a man of education, none of it exempts you from accountability for what you do to other human beings. Unit 731 was the exception to that principle. Not because what happened there was less horrific, not because the victims mattered less, but because the Americans decided that the data was worth more than the trial. And so the men walked free, the records were buried, and the world was quietly asked to look the other way. This is the part of history that sits uncomfortably not just as a story about Japanese war crimes or American Cold War pragmatism or the long silence of a government unwilling to face what it had sanctioned. It is a story about what happens when justice is made negotiable, when the calculus of power overrides the calculus of right and wrong, when we decide that some truths are too inconvenient to hold anyone accountable for. Between 3,000 and 12,000 people entered Unit 731 and never left. Many more died beyond its walls, in villages where plague arrived from the sky and no one understood why. They were not given names in the records. They were given numbers, or nothing at all. The least we can do decades later is say their story out loud, because silence is exactly what Ishii asked for. They deserved to be remembered.